AM 1450, FM 99.3, KNSI, taking you home with VoigtJohnson Real Estate. You can hear this show every Thursday morning at 7:23, Saturday afternoon at 12:53, and remember to start that home search at VoigtJohnson.com. Brandon, good morning, sir.
Hello.
Hey, can I share this letter?
Yes.
I love these notes because not only, to me, it just kind of makes me feel good because I know I'm not alone. Out there in my thoughts,
we
right?
never are. There's no such thing as a bad question, right?
All right, here we go. We purchased our house earlier this year. Part of the agreement was the seller being able to stay in the home 2 weeks after closing. Dun, 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 right? They got the keys to the house. The home was filthy. There were piles of junk in the yard and in the garage. Are the sellers responsible for the cost of cleaning that home up, Brandon?
Oh, what a mess, right? Literally and figuratively. So just take a step back. What's being referred to a lot of time is fairly common and can be a advantageous situation, what's called a rent back situation. So for whatever reason, the sellers, and it could be a variety of things, needed to stay in the home, whether they're building or have their new home in place, but it was a value of them to stay in the home a week, 2 weeks, in this case 2 weeks after closing. And that's, I'd say, not uncommon. We deal with this probably a handful of times every year, and it's a good thing. That being said, you really have to dot your I's and cross your T's to avoid situations like this.
Is it all in the paperwork going in so you have signed everything?
Absolutely. So it's not as simple as just saying, hey, can I stay in the home an extra 2 weeks, and the buyer agreeing to it, especially if you're representing the buyer as an agent. And this is where we kind of are dedicated to know, we've done this before, is you really have to have the paperwork in place to, as best as possible, prevent this type of scenario from happening. And so what you do is, it's referred to as like a rent back. So can you get a deposit from the sellers? Absolutely.
Right.
What I think is paramount, and what we've coached our people through, is even though you're not taking possession of the day of closing, you still want to do a walkthrough on the day of closing.
It's still your house, right?
You own the house. Right. So I would absolutely, it's imperative that you do a walkthrough. And if it is in that condition at the time of closing, now you can address it prior to closing.
Yeah.
Or you can say, we want an increased deposit. Or you can put something further in writing to say, these things need to be remedied by possession. So I get that you're still moving. I get you still have stuff in the yard and the garage. But are we further reiterating that these are going to be gone? So it's being proactive through that process.
Okay.
And trying to prevent things like this.
Okay, so where does the seller's realtor come into play with all of this stuff, or do they?
Well, absolutely they should, but again, not knowing the specifics and have been there in the listing agent's shoes, the listing agent could be saying, hey, you need to get these things done. How cooperative are the sellers? I don't know.
You can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Or is the listing agent not involved at all and not advising the sellers, hey, this is the expectation? So there could be culpability on both parties, but it's absolutely imperative on the buyer's agent to be prompting the listing agent to be, I don't want to say setting up the seller, but making sure they're making strides that the expectations are met. So it's just
doing the responsible thing.
Right. So it's all about, and there's a lot of other things, right? You got to make sure who's insuring the home during that period.
Right.
Is the buyer's lender. There's a lot of things that go into it other than just, hey, I'm just going to show up 2 weeks after and get the keys. Because, heaven forbid, is there a plumbing leak in that 2 weeks? Who's responsible? Like, who's responsible for the repair items?
Yeah.
Like, who's maintaining the yard? All of those things should be, the more detailed in writing you have, the better, because any and everything can go wrong during that 2 weeks, right?
Well, and accidents can happen. A pipe can burst, that sort of thing. But what if the seller, who's going to be hanging out for an extra couple of weeks, I think you'd better have a going away party.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, you got to put yourself in, this isn't necessarily specific to a rent back or a holdover situation. Just in general, when a seller's moving out, their mindset is they're excited about their new place. I mean, you get great sellers that clean to a T, but a lot of them, their priorities isn't isn't passing it on. Some sellers are great and are about it, but a lot of times they're more excited about their place they're moving into, and they're not putting as much energy into passing on a clean house. Whereas the buyer's perspective is they're excited about moving in. They're moving in. They're not thinking about cleaning the oven or doing any of that. So aside from the rent back or the holdover situation, just in any traditional closing, the better you can communicate from an agent perspective, and this is part of what we focus on,
Right.
is how is the home going to be left? A lot of times, you pull up to do the walkthrough and the yard's knee high, right? And that's just one of those things you just see your buyer's face because they've got so much on their plate to work with on moving and getting stuff. The last thing they want to do is do the past 2 weeks of house maintenance. And that. So communicating between the agents, setting expectations, is a lot of it can be avoidable with just having the conversations ahead of time. But a lot of times agents just set it and forget it and don't realize it till the day of closing, and then that time it can create more problems than could have been prevented.
I cannot imagine what that must be like to have that kind of a scenario playing out from the purchaser's standpoint. Talk about a heartbreak.
Yeah, and I mean, we've all been there as agents. I mean, I think of, Heidi and I, showing up and clearing out a shed full of stuff. I mean, that's part of our job, and that's what we do. A lot of it can be prevented in a scenario like this where it's a rent back and they've already closed. You have less. So their question is the seller responsible? Technically, yes. The cost to cure, the cost to go after them is probably going to exceed the cost to clean it up.
Yeah, exactly right. All right, very important. How do we work with you at VoigtJohnson Real Estate?
320-774-2400 or online at VoigtJohnson.com.
Taking you home with VoigtJohnson Real Estate, Thursday morning, 7:23, Saturday afternoon at 12:53. Start that home search at VoigtJohnson.com. Brandon, thank you.
Thanks, Bob.